Hello and welcome to another edition of the Future World Alliance Speaker Series. We're very excited to bring you today's talk. The Future World Alliance works to empower people to drive economic and social transformation. We believe that through collaboration and collective action, we can create a world where the abundance of human ingenuity and creativity is not constrained by the limits of human nature. Our focus is on responsible AI education, particularly K through 12, internationally. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed today's speaker session.
Thank you everyone for joining the October Speaker Series organized by Future World Alliance. Without further ado, I would like to yield to Sarah Hubbard.
My name is Sarah Hubbard, and I figured today I'd talk about Web3, DAOs, and the future of human coordination. Let's see. So I'm a technology and public purpose fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School right now, where I am working on research around Web3 and DAOs. And I just published this blog post, and so I figured this would be a really good audience to kind of share that with, share a couple kind of notes and key concepts from it, and answer any questions. So I picked the idea of Web3 for the Future World Alliance because even though I know, as a part of the Future World Alliance, we're mostly focused on like artificial intelligence and this K through 12 audience, but I still thought a lot of what's happening with Web3 is particularly relevant because one, from the artificial intelligence side, we have to think about will the future of AI development be built on this like transparent, permissionless ledger? Will it take this more decentralized approach? Will ownership shift to users? And will this AI development stop happening behind like closed doors of big tech companies? And then with the K through 12 audience, will the next generation grow up with Web3? So I figured that as we're even thinking about AI and education and K through 12, I think Web3 is still like a really important kind of concept for this group to maybe understand, so we can start thinking about it as we think about the future development of some of these things. So why Web3 and how did this really come to be? So I picked out, you may have heard the buzzword like Web3 being thrown around a lot. And I think a lot of it comes from a couple of very dominant trends in society. And I think by kind of understanding these larger societal trends, we understand why this ideological movement of Web3 has picked up so much steam. So a couple of the trends that I've kind of pointed out are, one, I think people are really tired of being the product, right? Power's centralized into the hands of a couple large technology companies. The internet primarily has this advertising business model, and as users, we're the product, and we usually end up exchanging our data for services, right? Two, in general, government distrust has risen around the world. Distrust in our traditional institutions and media and political polarization and misinformation, all of these kinds of things that have come about. I think we see as like a growing trend that we're all facing. And then number three that I call out is like wealth inequality is growing around the world. There's limited social mobility, access to like financial services and tools. And, back to kind of the first point, I think a lot of people want to be the beneficiaries of all the wealth that's been created through these internet platforms and online tools and services. So I think those are some of the dominant trends that have kind of led us here. And a lot of the momentum and vision of what Web3 is really a response to a lot of these overarching trends. So now I'll go into what is Web3. So Web3 is really this very like catch-all term that refers to the next version of the internet that has this emphasis on decentralization. So you may have heard all these buzzwords. There's like NFTs and DAOs and DeFi and DApps and all of these kind of buzzwords that circulate about in headlines. But really you can think of it as experiments in decentralization that's on top of this blockchain and smart contract technology that makes up Web3. So I kind of have this little visual here, but really you can think of it as, you know, first there was blockchain, then on top of blockchain, now we have this ability to do kind of smart contracts. And then on top of that, there's now been all sorts of different experiments of like, oh, well, we could maybe form organizations around that, or all sorts of different things. So I kind of have this Web3 stack here. And this space has seen a ton of momentum. So even though it is a very forward-looking concept, it's right now there's DAOs that have billions of dollars in their treasuries. There's been tons of venture capital investment in this space. You know, millions, billions of dollars spent towards, you know, mostly these kind of Web3 types of companies or organizations. And then lots of proposed legislation coming out. So there's like the White House is putting out like, you know, call to action for frameworks around this. There's tons of different proposed legislation really around the world trying to figure out how to address this. So a lot of Web3 is it's happening now in a very big, real way, very quickly. And so now it's up to us to kind of figure out, what does this mean? And what does this mean for the world and our organizations and how we coordinate and the kinds of products we use? So lots of really interesting stuff happening. And I'll call out kind of a couple of really key concepts from the, you know, idea of Web3. So the first is that it's very decentralized and there's this idea of shared ownership, right? So this is basically the idea that builders and users will have kind of the shared ownership in the organizations and the platforms that they use. So instead of this, you know, as I was saying, it's kind of this response to like people being the product, right? And then also the power and benefits are really distributed, right? So it's really trying to take a better look at, you know, how can we still, you know, instead of this people being the product, right? How can we maybe have shared ownership and shared value of these platforms that we're using and creating today and have more of a say over what happens with them? Another big kind of concept with Web3 is the idea of it being trustless. So, you know, there's a lot of experimentation with all sorts of interesting incentive and mechanism design and, you know, ways to do governance that basically don't need to rely upon a third party. There's also a couple other concepts I'll call out that are kind of big pillars of what people think, you know, Web3 should be, which is also like censorship resistance, you know, native payments for this kind of new like digitally native tools and world we live in, and then interoperability between platforms. So the idea that okay, I shouldn't just be like locked into this one platform. I should be able to have more ownership over my data and my digital assets and be able to take that around to different things, right? So I'll just say that's basically the kind of overall maybe vision of Web3, right? And it's still very much in its infancy, right? Like there's a lot of experimentation happening in this space. There's a ton of momentum in this space. But a lot of these things are very early, right, in figuring out their applications and what exactly their product market fit may be. But it's kind of ideologically like a trend that people are kind of pushing towards and exploring as this like next version of the internet, right? Then I'll call out that one of the more interesting things to me that's happening in the Web3 space is DAOs. And DAOs are these, decentralized autonomous organizations, right? So the idea is that they're able to leverage like the smart contracts that are on top of the blockchain, right? That basically can, execute like decisions, right? And the idea being that now can we form these organizations that are kind of coded in these smart contracts, right? And so that idea is basically, so as a definition of DAOs, loosely, there's a lot of different definitions, but you can think of it sort of as a community-led entity without a central authority, right? And so what we're seeing is there's groups of people that come together with some shared mission. They pool together their resources. They use smart contracts and this, blockchain technology to kind of code the system of their organization. And then they use that to also like make and execute collective decisions. So you can think it's very ideologically similar to a cooperative, but it's very like internet native, if that makes sense. So right now there's all sorts of different kinds of DAOs emerging, right? There's impact-focused DAOs and investment DAOs and social DAOs, and really any kind of organization or any kind of thing you can do, there's some group of people on the internet coming together to try to do it in a DAO right now. So, when you think of ones that are like impact-focused DAOs, right, that's right, focused on like how can we fund public goods, and how can we, think of it more of like a grant giving organization or a nonprofit, right? And so you see people here that are coming together to form things like Gitcoin, and Gitcoin, the idea, right, is this is a DAO where people can come together and pool their funds and basically provide grants to really interesting proposals, more on like open source software, and they can experiment with all different kinds of like governance mechanisms or quadratic funding and lots of different things that in a normal organization you may not have as much of a say. You may not know where all your money is going to the nonprofit that you donate to, for example. And this basically, the idea is because it's all on the blockchain and because it's all, much more transparent, you can see all the decisions that are made. You can have a vote in the decisions that are being made by this organization, and basically have much more of a say and a stake in what's happening in these groups that you're a part of. And they can experiment with all this interesting like incentive design and mechanism design and quadratic funding, all sorts of different things like this that a normal organization may not be able to do very quickly or easily or globally, right? Because these organizations kind of span the whole, like people from around the world, right? And today, if people from all around the world wanted to come together to do some collective thing and as a part of an organization, how does that work, right? There's like a lot of you have to figure out how to do all sorts of paperwork to start some entity, to do this, to do that, right? And it's very difficult. And so I think the idea is what we're seeing emerge are people all over the world coming together who have similar, ideas or goals, and kind of forming these groups to collectively do something together and pool the resources to do it. So you saw even like Ukraine DAO pop up as soon as things started happening there, people all around the world came together really quickly to start this Ukraine DAO, and basically don't figure out how to collectively donate this, over $7 million to different Ukrainian organizations that are on the ground, right? So lots of really interesting things happening in the DAO space that have been obviously very interesting to observe and make you wonder where this will all go and kind of what is the best fit for DAOs. So as I was kind of calling out, there's lots of interesting characteristics with some of these organizations, right? I mentioned like the governance mechanisms, right? So a lot of times when you're a member of a DAO, you're a token holder and you can purchase or earn these tokens and then use these tokens to kind of vote on proposals, but also cash out at any time, like you're not stuck, right? There's all sorts of codified like rules and smart contracts to have members vote on proposals and automatically execute this collective decision. Again, like I mentioned, they're very digitally native global organizations. Now we have people all over the world who don't know each other and don't have to trust each other can coordinate towards furthering some common goal. And then the idea is that they're also very transparent and decentralized. And obviously there's been a massive range of experimentation again in this space, and they exist across a large spectrum of actually how decentralized or actually how autonomous they are in practice. But these are some of the interesting characteristics and kind of ideal forms that could exist. So in general, I'll call out maybe why I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because I think obviously I'm trying to separate the signal from the noise and what's interesting and all the hype in this whole Web3 space. But I'm hopeful about this potential of this larger ideological movement and a lot of the applications of the underlying infrastructure for blockchain and smart contract technologies. As we mentioned earlier, I think we're just seeing this really big response, right, to the major centralization of technology, right, and people really wanting more shared ownership in the platforms that they use and having kind of more open source types of things, right? So I think that eventually DAOs will find their foothold somewhere, right? I think they'll find where they add some unique value or kind of product market fit and what exact compelling use cases they have. And I think in general it's going to push the whole industry and a lot of our existing organizations towards exploring more democratic forms of ownership, coordination, and decision making for a more equitable future. I'm basically doing a lot of research in this space right now, so this is a huge dump of a lot of my open research questions. I think I'll be primarily focusing on understanding more deeply, what are the compelling use cases for DAOs? Where do they really add value? And then what can existing Web2 organizations learn from what DAOs are doing? Anyway, so lots of open research questions in this space. I've also included a couple of interesting links and resources if you'd like to learn a lot more. But otherwise, yeah, maybe I will just end with, again, calling back to why I think this is interesting for the Future World Alliance, right? Which is that I think we're seeing this huge momentum in response to this, a lot of the ethical concerns and centralization of power in, the Web2 kind of big tech sort of world we're in today. And as we are thinking about this future world and where AI is going and what the next generation of K through 12, for example, is going, I think this will probably play a major role in a lot of where the technology industry is moving, and the kinds of infrastructure it may be built on. So very interesting to think about, and look forward to chatting with this group more on all of these topics. And with that, maybe I will open it up for stop presenting. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to open it up for any questions.
Thank you very much for the interesting talk. We will open the space now for contributions by way of questions, comments, for the next 5 minutes before we have the second speaker. So, is there anyone with a question, comment? Okay, Mr. Ross, you want to go?
Yes, I have just a quick one. First, thanks, Sarah, and really very interesting space. Thank you for the resources. That was going to be one of my questions. But then just briefly, if you could send us or share a link to your blog post as well.
Oh, yeah.
So we can accompany the video with that. But no, this is fantastic. Yeah, really interesting, fast-moving space, and not something that is, at least in my world, sort of mainstream yet. So thank you for this. Yeah, very interesting.
Thanks for that. Well, I guess my question is, well, not really a question. It's just the fact that, well, countries of the world today find it hard to regulate, technologies like that because they're decentralized. Power has to be centralized. That's how you can control power. And we understand that these things are sociopolitical implications that can be really, that can be really influential. So the question I guess I want to ask is, which is one of the recent questions that you raised, is how policymakers can help, to ensure that we view the level of, safety, transparency, security around the use of, these technologies, and how, trustless. I imagine how that is, possible. I would think that if I'm transacting with somebody on the other side, I'm supposed to have some sort of disposition of trust in a way, but I don't know how that exactly fits into the scheme of things. I don't know if you want to say more about that. Thanks.
Yeah. Let's see. So I guess on the question about like policymakers, I think that you've hit the nail on the head when it's like that is the exact question that everyone's kind of trying to figure out right now, which is that we've seen a huge emergence of everything in this space, and now the role of the policymaker, right, is to kind of separate, okay, well, what good can this technology do, right? What harms does it have? Obviously, like, we've seen headlines of like lots of scams, so then that calls into question like consumer protection and all these kinds of things, right? And so basically policymakers right now have the hard job of figuring out, understanding the technology to then say, okay, what's good about this, and how can we amplify the good, and how can we attempt to like protect against the like potential harms that it could cause, right? I think right now there's a ton of different policy proposals and legislation out there. Most of it is primarily centered around like DeFi and stable coins and some of that, a little bit less on like things happening with DAOs. But there's states in the US that have already started creating these, like Wyoming has the Wyoming DAO LLC, which the idea is that it's like a legal wrapper for DAOs, right? So that you have the same kind of like limited liability as a participant in that, right? So there's all sorts of really interesting things emerging. Obviously the concern is like that policymakers move really quickly to like shut a lot of this down without understanding some of the like interesting benefits that it might have. But lots of people in this space kind of working on that at the moment. I probably don't have like a quick answer on like some silver bullet of policy that's gonna do everything perfectly, but we're actually, I'm hosting an event soon. I'm trying to do this perspectives on Web3 with the Kennedy School, where we're like, and it's open to the public, bringing in like different builders in the space, investors in the space, policymakers in the space to kind of give their perspectives and illuminate a little bit more on like what's happening right now. And then I'll just quickly mention on like trustless. I think, let's see, how do I quickly mention that? There's interesting examples of like how blockchain technology is used around the world, and I think it's really interesting seeing how they work in other contexts outside of the United States, right? Where, for example, there's things like in certain countries where there may be a lot of like transfers of power, right? Like different, kinds of leaderships and governments coming in and out, right? And in that process, there's things like your land like deeds and property rights and all these kinds of things that can get lost along the way. And the idea is, if you have some like immutable blockchain, maybe it makes more sense to put it on there so that no matter what powers are changing up here, there's some immutable record of history that can outlast like the changing of the guard, right? So interesting things to think about, right? Blockchain's obviously not going to be the answer to every application or technology, but it may be an interesting choice for certain applications where you want an immutable record. Anyways, so with that, I'm happy to follow up with like lots more information, but for now, I will turn it over to Cyrus.
Okay, thank you very much. Please, you can leave your email in the chat box so that people can send you questions afterwards if they need to.